Hello there. We're somewhere completely new today. We're at my job. I've been working with books for 5 to 6 years now. I started off at the most well-known big corporate bookstore within Canada and later moved to this here indie bookstore. My experiences at each place have been very different from each other. Mostly because the first one gave me genuine trauma that I had to discuss with a therapist. So, for obvious reasons, I've been hesitant to make this video. But it's been my most requested one, and I think I have sorted out my thoughts well enough to talk about them with you. So to start off with my experience working for a corporate bookstore, I will say very plainly, it is no different than working at any other corporation. The workers were constantly getting screwed over. I'm just gonna set the scene for you for a second. We had these things called performance reviews, where once a year we would sit down with our managers and they would tell us if we could have a raise or not. But the thing was, these performance reviews weren't really based off of your performance. It was based off of your sales and your numbers, despite the fact that we weren't even a commission-based job. For the 3.5 years I was at this company, I was the person who got the highest wage increase. But that actually upset me because at some point I was getting paid more than the people who'd been there for 5 years longer than me. And also I discovered that only about 4 out of 50 of the employees got raises at all. I remember fighting my general manager on this and telling her how wrong it was, and her response being, "You should be happy though, you're getting more money." And I was trying to tell her, okay, but this isn't about me. I care about the people I work with, actually. We all deserve raises. Why haven't you given them any? And it was all based on, oh, their numbers didn't look as good. They didn't sell as much. But you have to keep in mind that this company never actually hired anyone full-time. They just hired 50 part-time people, so they never had to give us benefits. And so they only scheduled people 2 or 3 days a week. And so yeah, their numbers didn't look great because they literally didn't work enough to have their numbers look great. It was this endless cycle. And people who'd worked there for 8, 9, 10 years got $10 an hour, just minimum wage. Throughout the years, they stopped paying us for overtime and started getting us to do things outside our job descriptions. I was kind of this voice or advocate within my place of work, where when enough people complained, I was the one who took it to the general manager. She scared the shit out of everybody, but I don't let people do that. Call it an authority issue if you will, but I just wanted me and my peers to be treated like a human being. So I didn't care. I was gonna take it up with her. I remember confronting this general manager once and saying, hey, look, all these things you're getting us to do, they're not in our written contract. But you know where they are? In a different contract that gets paid more. Can we get a raise? And she decided to say, oh, actually, we are going to abolish that higher paid position. And all these tasks now belong to the minimum wage workers. All of this really bothered me. And so what I wanted to do was take on a leadership position so I could actually positively change the system from within. And in the end, I think I made a little bit of change, but it really destroyed my mental health. All of those corporate horror stories you hear about the 1% just treating their workers like garbage was the exact same in that bookstore. Being a part of the leadership team and being the only one trying to fight for respect and equal pay and equal work was a living nightmare. I can't even legally repeat the shit they said to me and about my colleagues and my coworkers. Long story short, in the end, after I became a part of the leadership team, I might have hypothetically built a case against my general manager and managers, and also hypothetically might have got 3 out of 5 of them fired. You got to keep in mind though, that when I became a part of the leadership team, I was the only singular person who had worked my way up from being a worker. Everyone else was hired externally. So as someone who knew what it was like to be a worker, I was the one that everyone confided in. Every 2 to 3 days, someone was crying. A handful of girls experienced sexual assault from one particular manager that he tried stepping on my toes here and there, but I didn't realize how bad it was until other people started telling me about their experiences. Time and time again, people called in sick, but told me in confidentiality it was because they were so depressed. And then all of this ended up reflecting on their performance reviews, where their managers said they were unreliable, never coming into work, blah, 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 blah. Thus, they never got paid. And so, maybe you're catching on, it was an absolute shit show. Now, how did we get here to this indie bookstore where that's not the case? Well, as I was working at that corporate bookstore, I heard from a customer that this new indie bookstore was just starting to open. I looked it up online, confirmed that that was true, and then reached out to the owner. I basically gave her 2 pieces of information. I said, 1, hello, my name's Nicole. I work at a bookstore right now and I would love to work for you if you're looking, and then gave her my resume. As well as I said, I'm also a poet. I have 2 published books. Would you take them? She basically responded saying, I'm not looking for work. Sorry about that. But yes, I'd love to take your books. Let's meet up sometime. I thought, better than nothing. So we scheduled a time and I brought my poetry books and introduced myself. I just got to know her for about an hour, hour and a half. And at this time, she hadn't even purchased furniture or built any bookcases. And I learned that she had a whole family, kids, and so many other responsibilities, and it was really hard opening the store by herself. So what I ended up saying to her was, I know you're not looking to hire, but I have mad respect for you. I love this space. I'm so excited for the store. Can I help you set it up for free? Can I, whenever I'm not at my job, come by and help you build furniture and set everything up? And she said, yes, I'd love the help. And so the first day I went there, I built a bunch of bookcases for her. I shared my own stories from the bookstore I worked at and how she could set herself apart and what the other one had been lacking that I can already envision in her current place. And by the end of that first day of me helping her out, she gave me a contract with a starting date. I will say I did still help her set up that bookstore for about 3 months for free. But as soon as it opened, I started getting paid and I have never left since. Our launch was August 2020, so in the thick of the pandemic. But as we're speaking, it is January 2023. And we've been doing better than ever. I've noticed that from the pandemic, there's been this slight silver lining of people wanting to support local businesses more and people trying to become more educated on others not like them, and particularly marginalized voices. For the 2.5 years I've been at this bookstore, our best-selling literature is indigenous philosophies and teaching, as well as queer fiction. It just feels like people are so much more genuine in this bookstore than the last one. I had to really fight to be treated with respect and constantly battle a moral ground at my last corporate job. And then here, people are just on the same page. People are just nice. And then the work I do is genuinely meaningful. I get to research and find and give money to unknown authors, people with debut books, people that are diverse or marginalized, underrated some way, or not celebrated the way they should be. And all of that, not just to support the small artist, but also teach customers how they can do the same thing. And the last thing I'll say on working specifically in an indie bookstore is that it is a slow-paced and intimate environment. If you are someone who finds wonder in strangers' stories and genuinely love listening to people, then an indie bookstore is a great place to be. However, if you're someone who just kind of wants to get through your shift, just wants to make money, doesn't really give a shit about who you see, I'm not saying that's a bad way to be, because especially working retail and corporate, it can make you jaded that way. All I'm saying is an indie bookstore is not the place to be. There are days I come home and it feels like my brain's gonna explode because it's so overloaded with strangers' stories. Sometimes it feels like I've lived 10 years in one day. Every once in a while, I wish that wasn't the case. Just like everyone else, I have days and weeks where my personal life is a mess, and so that added weight can be a bit overwhelming. But overall, those intimate conversations are one of the best parts about this job. And I just love to give some examples of that. So when we first opened up this indie bookstore, I created this display called Celebrate Indigenous Authors. And I put this book on there called Starlight Tours. Now, if you don't know what Starlight Tours are, it is a gruesome part of Canadian history. Essentially, the RCMP, or Governmental Police Force, would round up Indigenous people from the streets, from the roads, and dump them in the middle of nowhere on the coldest days of the winter and leave them to die. The RCMP treated this like a game and would call it the Starlight Tours. So we had this book written about that, and I put it on display. And in walks this Indigenous man and starts staring at the book. I told him I read it, and he said, I painted a picture based off of this. I asked him if I could see it, and he'd actually brought a bunch of art prints on the go with him. So we laid them all out on this table, and I was just blown away by his art. And the particular one he was talking about was this Indigenous man walking through the snow, with Van Gogh's Starry Night in the background. On the spot, I bought a piece of artwork from him and then asked him where he sells his art. And he just said, by doing this, I just walk around and talk to people. And I don't know, I just got the idea of like, what if we sold this in our store? And so I got his name, I got his information, and I talked to my boss. She thought it was a great idea, and for 2.5 years, we've been selling his artwork. And we don't take a single bit of profit off it. He gets 100% of the money. That is not something I would have been able to do in the corporate bookstore. And he and I are really close friends now too. I've gotten to know him over so much time, and he has shared stories with me from when he was in a residential school to being in and out of jail, being addicted to drugs and trying to sober up from alcohol, and how art saved him throughout all of this. He has told me some brutal stories. I mean, there was one time bright and early on a Sunday morning, he came in and told me he almost got shot in the face, and I was just like, Jesus. And I can't even begin to explain the amount of racist things that have and do happen to him, but I hear all of it. I get updates on his life every few days, and I have been for the last 2.5 years. And that is not something that would ever once happen at that corporate bookstore. There was this time a woman was in our store just acting really off, and when I asked her genuinely how she was doing, she broke down and told me that her son killed himself with the gun she gifted him. She told me she's in therapy, but she doesn't believe it when her therapist says it's not her fault. You know, she was completely beside herself. She collapsed on the ground, and I hugged her and I listened to her, you know, and I found out her son was my age, and I told her about my own depression and the thoughts I had when I tried to kill myself. Just because she had all these questions, like, what were the signs? What did I miss? Why didn't he tell me? Why this? Why? And I genuinely had answers being on the other side of it. That was a really intense conversation, but she left like thanking me and coming back later to further talk with me and get to know me more outside of the sad things, and vice versa, of course. I'm gonna take a step back for a moment though. I don't want it to seem like working at an indie bookstore means you're gonna become a therapist. There have been weird things too. There have been goofy things. There was one time, as soon as I opened the store, where this man walks in with his hands behind his back and he says, "Do you have a spoon or a fork I can use?" Because we serve coffee at this indie bookstore, I said, "I have both. Which would you prefer?" He said, "Doesn't matter, either or." So I took the first thing that came out of the drawer, which was a fork. I handed him the fork, and he reveals this tub of ice cream. It was like 9:30 a.m. He reveals a tub of ice cream and starts eating it with this fork, and I was like, "Are you sure you don't want a spoon?" And he said, "I'm good." And then he walked away, and I never saw that man again. To this day, I think about him. There was one time I witnessed a first date, and when I say first date, I mean there would literally be no chance of a second one because it was so bad. Firstly, it started off strong with a palm reading. This woman told the man she was on a date with that not only would he not be able to have as many kids as she'd like, but that he could potentially be a cheater. A bold start to which she proposed that they discuss language. Now I thought, what a weird topic. I'm intrigued, so of course I'm listening to this whole thing. She says, "We're gonna play a language game. I'm gonna start off by asking you a question. What are your 3 favorite things about me?" This man, very cleverly, says, "I like that you seem like you know who you are. I like that you're well-spoken, and you're very beautiful." Instantly, she goes, "Failed." She says, "This is what I mean by language. I don't want you to appreciate me for my looks. I want you to know me deeply." Which, fair enough, except they literally are on a first date. He doesn't know her yet. Right away, she doesn't give him a chance to speak. She says, "It's my turn. My favorite things about you are your hair, your eyes, your skin. See, it doesn't feel too good, does it?" And he said, "I don't know. I kind of like it. You can keep complimenting me." And all she did was stare at him in the eyes for 2 minutes long. They didn't talk, they just stared. And he looked scared, and I don't even know what her face said. And that was the vibe for about 45 minutes. I could not believe my man was sticking that out. One day, this local author comes in, and I recognize him, but he doesn't recognize me. That's fine. The day I met him, my boss was the one working customers. I was behind the scenes doing inventory. I spotted him, but I didn't make myself known. This local author comes in and we're discussing poetry. That's fine. I love poetry. Except he writes poetry, and he tries to sell me his own book as if he's a customer. He said, "Have you read this guy's work?" And I said, "Nope." And he said, he's a big shot. He's becoming big. And I was like, is he now? And this guy goes, yeah, I'm surprised you didn't put him on the bestsellers table. And I said, well, it's because he hasn't been selling the best. I thought that was pretty funny. He did not. He literally posed this book as a friend of a friend and just like saying he was going to be Canada's bestseller. And it was just like the most disgusting, unhumbling thing I'd ever heard. One time, my coworker took a picture of some hentai, and the book was called Tits, Tits, Tits. And the cover had 3D giant titties. As a joke, I said, that's all I want for my birthday. And then he bought it for me. I was sent a picture of the receipt. Shocked. So then what did I do? I looked up more hentai. My search results were very questionable. But then I found a book called Thigh Highs, which was a book with a bunch of gay men, giant beefy thighs, and schoolgirl skirts. We gifted each other these books, and since then have continued on a hentai tradition. The last one I gave him was called Dick Sword Island, and I think you should look that one up. One time, a mafia came into our store. The leader's name was Dale, and he did threaten to knock over our bookcases. On a better day, a drag queen came in and said, "Slay," to about 10 different book covers. Once, me and about 8 different customers, all of us strangers, discussed cryogenics. We talked about, is it worth ever preserving to see the future? Do we like humanity enough? Go. Once, a customer told me he traveled to China, and I said, wow, how was that? And he said, not great because I went with my ex. I said, why did you go with your ex? And he said, well, we didn't start off as exes. And I said, tell me more. He told me they went to China as a couple, but it was their first time ever traveling together, and I guess she was just awful to everyone who actually lived there, saying racist stuff towards the food, like, ew, gross, I could never eat that, you know, that stuff. I guess he couldn't stand it, so he broke up with her in China, and then proceeded to tell me that he canceled her plane ticket so she was trapped in China. And I was like, whoa. And he said, you know what? Not my proudest moment, but I was emotional. And I was like, I get it. There's also this little old lady that comes to visit the store because her husband goes to dialysis nearby. As his health has gotten worse and worse, she's come into our store more often. And so I've recognized her and gotten to know her as a person. I got to know what her kids are like, what she used to do for work, how she grew up, and all the things she's had to unlearn with time. Just as an example, I hesitate to talk about my queerness with old people because I don't want to get hate crimed, but she's not someone I ever felt like I needed to do that with. I told her some stories about my ex-girlfriend and she had a hoot with it, and she's a good one. She's a very pleasant old lady. And I can tell she doesn't read a ton. She doesn't really buy any of our novels, but she's always looking through our cookbooks. And so I got the idea that for Christmas, I would buy her a cookbook as a present. I researched a bunch and I found one that had recipes similar to her heritage, but also different enough that she could learn some new ones. And come Christmas, I gave it to her, and wow, I have never seen an old woman cry like that before. She just poured out and told me how thankful she is that our store exists, and how when her husband's health started declining and he started going to dialysis, she thought she was going to lose her mind. She told me how depressed she was and that her thoughts were spiraling and she felt so alone. And then she came across our bookstore and she met me and my coworkers. She told me this is her safe space, and that it helps her feel grounded, and that she wouldn't have been able to get to this day without us. And that was crazy to hear. I was so glad I gave her that present, but felt even more thankful just to get to know her. It's stories like that that I hear every week. So yeah, I guess that's what it's like working at a bookstore, for me at least. It is at times emotionally intense, but also so fulfilling, so heartwarming. Oh, and if you're a reader, which I'm assuming you are if you're at this point in the video, you usually get a 20 to 30% discount off books, which is very helpful when you buy them frequently. Okay, that's as much ground as I can cover for now. Maybe eventually I'll make a video where I'm only sharing stories from the bookstore. Let me know if that's something you're interested in. In general, leave a comment, and also like the video and subscribe if you already haven't. I upload videos every 2 weeks, so I'll see you at that one. Bye.